"We've got this." "No worries at all," Bethany announced, her voice steady and full of confidence. And truthfully, she wasn't wrong. From a practical standpoint, we were more than capable. Since I was about 9, my mom and I had spent time every summer navigating the vast network of lakes aboard a cozy cabin cruiser. But we had never done it alone. Those trips had always included my Uncle David and Aunt Melissa. And that's where this particular trip got complicated. David's mother had suddenly needed major heart surgery, prompting both him and Melissa to head across the country to help with her recovery. The boat had already been reserved, and a sizable deposit had been paid. Now the big question loomed. Would Mom and I still go? Just the two of us? Handling the cruiser wasn't a problem. We both knew what we were doing. And as usual, Bethany was brimming with excitement about getting away to the lake. If anything, she seemed more eager than ever this time. I, on the other hand, didn't share that same enthusiasm. Not fully. There was something about the idea of spending 2 full weeks alone with my mother, exploring the quieter, more isolated corners of the lake system, that made me uneasy. It stirred something I couldn't quite define, some subtle, buried emotion that I usually kept sealed off. At that point, I couldn't say exactly why I felt hesitant. There was simply a vague sense of tension bubbling beneath the surface. I looked over at my mother, meeting her gaze, those unusual, light green eyes of hers locking onto mine. Since I was young, those eyes had always had a strange effect on me. They were almost entrancing, as if she could see things I hadn't spoken aloud. Part of me was drawn to her gaze, drawn to the familiarity, the intensity. Yet another part recoiled, worried about what she might find if she looked too closely. Now, when I think back on it, I sometimes wonder if she already sensed the thoughts I hadn't quite admitted to myself. For context, I was 23 at the time, and my mother was 39. I had never met my biological father, and honestly, I didn't think about him much. His side of the family must have had money, though, because my mother received steady financial support throughout my childhood, enough to help us stay afloat until I was able to support myself. Bethany never even considered giving me up for adoption. She was determined to raise me herself. Still, during my earliest years, my grandparents helped a lot while my mom focused on finishing her education. Back then, she felt more like a cool older sister than a traditional parent. Around the time I turned 7, Bethany began taking on more of the day-to-day parenting. By the time I was 11, she had earned her certification in web design, and we moved into a townhouse of our own. From that point forward, she was fully responsible for raising me. But even then, that older sister energy never really went away. Our relationship existed in a space that blended maternal care with something more casual, almost sibling-like. We were incredibly close. I loved her deeply, and I knew without a doubt that she felt the same. Growing up, I'd always felt a certain pride in having such a young and attractive mother. Whenever my friends came over, their reactions were almost predictable. Wide eyes, stunned silence, then playful teasing. They couldn't believe she was my mom. While I was preparing for this upcoming trip to the lake, I'd already made a quiet decision. This would probably be the last vacation of its kind. For one, I was 23 now, and the appeal of family getaways had started to wear thin. I wanted to explore the world on my own, chase new adventures with friends, not revisit the same familiar lake. So, when I first heard that Aunt Melissa and Uncle David wouldn't be able to join us, a part of me had actually felt relieved. I figured the whole trip would be called off. But now, watching my mother light up with excitement, that assumption was clearly wrong. A flicker of guilt crept over me. My indifference to the trip felt exposed under the quiet scrutiny of my mother's observant gaze. There was something about the way she looked at me, attuned, almost searching, that made my uneasiness feel like a hidden flaw she might uncover. In the end, I agreed. Yes, we would go. We set out on a bright Thursday morning. The marina, nestled at the edge of the city's outer sprawl, marked the boundary between busy civilization and the wild, open silence of the lake country. Beyond this point, for nearly 100 miles, the vast waterways wound through scarcely populated stretches of land. Towering stands of maple and oak, some centuries old, lined the banks, part of a landscape shaped long ago by glacier. It felt untouched, like a forgotten world that time had left behind. Apart from 5 scattered trading posts tucked along the shoreline, there was nothing else, no towns, no traffic, no noise. We'd brought enough food and supplies to last us at least a week. At the helm, I guided the cruiser steadily forward, the engine humming beneath my feet, a smooth, familiar sound that faded into the background unless someone slid open the main cabin door. We cruised upstream at about 20 miles an hour, with a little extra speed on the return when we'd be riding with the current. The cruiser's layout was compact but comfortable, a main suite tucked into the bow, a smaller bunk room toward the rear, and a central cabin that included the helm, a cozy lounge, and a small kitchenette. Outdoor decks at the front and back offered space to stretch out. The rear deck also had a swim platform and ladder, making it easy to get in and out of the water. After a couple of hours, the last cottages and boat docks disappeared behind us. The lake grew wide and still. My hand stayed on the wheel while Mom moved around inside, unpacking supplies and beginning preparations for our dinner. We'd left just after noon, and our usual routine was to stop traveling around 4 o'clock, giving us time to swim, walk the forested trails, or maybe try to catch a fish or two. With everything in place, Bethany came up beside me, quietly watching the water as we rounded a sweeping bend. Off in the distance, a group of ducks dipped and vanished beneath the surface. She lingered for a moment, then spoke softly. I guess we should start thinking about docking soon. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and stepped away, leaving me to scan the shoreline. For those unfamiliar with this kind of boating, the docking process in these parts isn't complicated, but it does require a bit of care. Cruisers like ours had a moderate draft, which meant we could ease the boat toward shore without running aground. Typically, we'd secure the boat with 4 lines, starting with a stern line upstream to keep us steady against the current, followed by the bow lines and the second stern tie. I soon spotted a sheltered cove lined with sturdy trees close to the water. Easing the boat forward, I saw Mom already on the aft deck, holding the first rope. As soon as the boat kissed the muddy bank, she leapt ashore and wrapped a line around the thick, knotted root of an ancient tree. Once the line was tight, I cut the engine and stepped out to help her fasten the rest. Silence settled over everything like a soft blanket. There was a sacred stillness in these hidden corners of the lake, something primal, untouched. It had a weight to it, as if the air itself remembered the footsteps of those who lived here long before us. Some people find it eerie at first, even unsettling, but for me, it always felt like returning to something ancient and essential. Bethany and I stood there for a long moment, not speaking. The only sounds were the hush of wind threading through the treetops and the faint scurry of an unseen animal moving in the brush. It felt like we'd stepped out of time and into something older than memory itself. Then my mother's voice broke the quiet. "Look, Nathan." She pointed toward the sky. I followed her gaze and saw it, a great blue heron, wings stretched wide, gliding gracefully across the sky before descending toward the far shore. There was something regal in its flight, something timeless. "Always something magical out here," I said without thinking. Bethany chuckled, her laughter light and familiar. Time for our swim. The spell broke, and we both climbed back aboard, heading toward the swim platform at the rear of the cruiser. I lowered the compact metal ladder into the water, watching the ripples spread out across the lake's calm surface. Swimming had always been a part of these trips. Tradition, really, but before, my aunt and uncle had always been with us, their presence offering a kind of emotional buffer, keeping everything light and ordinary. Now, without them, something felt different, stronger, sharper. I turned to glance at my mother, and for some reason, it was like noticing her, really noticing her, for the very first time. She wasn't looking at me, just out across the lake, her vivid green eyes distant and focused elsewhere. The wind had undone her hair, sending loose auburn waves tumbling around her shoulders. She looked untamed, like she belonged to the wildness around us. And for a second, I felt like the ground shifted beneath me. With a cheerful laugh, she dove into the water, cutting cleanly through the surface and swimming out with confident, steady strokes. I hovered near the ladder, splashing half-heartedly, but soon the tension inside me made the water feel too tight around my chest. I climbed out and went inside, needing space to breathe. On the aft deck, I busied myself with a fishing rod, pretending to focus on getting it set up. Minutes later, I heard her returning, water cascading off her as she climbed the ladder. I kept my eyes down, but I could feel her presence, closer than before. She leaned in slightly, peering at the rod. "Trying your luck today?" she asked with a grin. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat was dry, my mind a blur. I mumbled something unintelligible and quickly said, "I think I'll go stretch my legs for a bit." Without missing a beat, she nodded and stepped into the cabin. When she came out again, she was wearing khaki shorts and a crisp white t-shirt. Without a word, she headed for the shore, her figure disappearing among the trees. Alone, I sat with a reel in my hands and my thoughts in chaos. I kept repeating to myself, "She's your mother. She's not just some woman. You can't think like this." But no matter how many times I told myself, the feeling refused to vanish. It was real, and it was terrifying. I forced my attention back to fishing, trying to push the confusion aside. Eventually, she returned and started preparing dinner without much conversation. When she called me down to eat, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. The meal passed in near silence, a rarity for us. Normally, meals were filled with easy chatter and shared observations about the day. This time, I couldn't bring myself to meet her eyes. I could still feel them, those unmistakable green eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. She knows, I thought, she knows exactly what I'm feeling. I barely tasted a single bite. When the plates were cleared, I immediately offered to handle the dishes, needing something, anything, to keep my hands occupied. Normally, we would wind down the evening with a few rounds of Scrabble, a long-time tradition. Without discussion, she retrieved the game and set it up while I scrubbed dishes in a haze. We played one game, just one. I couldn't focus, and she beat me effortlessly. Then she said, gently, "I think I'll head to bed early tonight." Relief washed over me. "Yeah, same here," I muttered, already packing the board away and tidying up. By the time I'd finished straightening the lounge, she'd already used a compact on-board shower. Her voice floated out from the bedroom, reminding me to rinse off before sleep. I didn't want to, but I also knew I needed the cold water, the ritual of it, to calm whatever was storming inside me. Morning came, but the tension hadn't lifted. Breakfast was subdued. The silence between us wasn't hostile, but it was heavy. We both avoided each other's gaze, like we were afraid of what we'd see if our eyes met. She feels it too, I thought with dread, and now I've ruined everything. After the meal, she started the engine. I unfastened the docking lines, and we slipped back onto the water, continuing northward through the lake system. The scenery was breathtaking, towering granite cliffs, mirrored bays, and islands like tiny green jewels scattered across the surface. But I couldn't enjoy any of it. I wasn't present. Neither was she. An hour into the journey, she wordlessly handed the wheel over to me and went to sit on the front deck, knees drawn up, her face unreadable. Another hour passed, then she quietly returned and resumed steering. We barely spoke. The entire day played out like that, adrift in our own thoughts, tethered only by routine. Late afternoon came, and we found a quiet cove to dock again. We swam. I tried fishing again. But everything felt hollow, like we were just going through the motions. There was no joy in it. The thought had been building in my mind all day. Maybe I should suggest cutting the trip short, going home early. But I never said the words, because just as dinner began, I found myself speechless again. Later that afternoon, Mom had gone for another swim, and I followed not long after. But it wasn't until I stepped back inside the cabin that the breath caught in my throat. The small lounge table had been transformed. A white linen cloth draped over it, 2 place settings of polished silverware glinting in the candlelight. Slender taper candles flickered gently as dusk slipped into evening. It felt like stepping into a quiet celebration, intimate, purposeful. Bethany stood by the kitchenette, wearing a deep red dress I'd never seen before. It wasn't flashy, but it fit her perfectly, simple, elegant, and quietly striking. "Do you like it?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. I brought it especially for this trip. It took me a second to find my voice. "It's a beautiful dress, Mom." As soon as the word Mom escaped my mouth, I noticed a change in her eyes. I hadn't called her that casually in a long time. She offered a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd clearly gone to effort, preparing the space, the dinner, everything, but it was difficult to focus on any of that. I was too distracted by the woman in front of me. Not just my mother now, but someone I was seeing through a different, unfamiliar lens. She tried to carry the conversation as we ate, making light comments, asking gentle questions. But it was strained on both sides. Her voice, though measured, carried a note of nervousness I wasn't used to hearing. There was no Scrabble that night. Maybe she sensed that my attention would wander. Instead, she suggested we relax and put on some music. I nodded, grateful for the change. She queued up a playlist of Chopin nocturnes through the cabin speakers. While many consider them cerebral pieces, they always stirred something deeper in me, something more intimate, almost physical. I couldn't help but wonder if she remembered that. We listened in silence. The only sounds were the soft keys drifting through the dimly lit cabin and the occasional lap of water brushing against the hull. The atmosphere was heavy, impossible to shake. After a while, I murmured that I was heading to bed. "I'll stay up a bit longer," she said quietly. I lay awake for a long time, my thoughts tangled and impossible to quiet. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I slipped into restless sleep. I don't know how long I was out before the storm hit. When I had gone to bed, the lake had been serene, mirror-flat and still. Now, the entire cruiser rocked violently. Rain slammed the roof overhead like a drumline, and the wind howled through the trees around the cove. The storm had come out of nowhere, as they often did on this lake system, funneled and amplified by the surrounding terrain. The boat groaned against its mooring lines, shuddering with every gust. I sat up abruptly, disoriented by the darkness and the noise. I leaned toward the small port window near my bunk, but could see nothing beyond the streaming water and blackness. Then, just barely, I thought I heard my name. I froze, listening. "Nathan." There it was again, clearer this time, cutting through the thunder. I swung my legs over the side of the bunk, grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my waist. The narrow hallway was dim, lit only by the glow beneath the aft stateroom door. "Nathan," the voice called once more. I knocked gently. "Yeah." "Come in, honey," came Bethany's voice, quieter now, but uncertain. I opened the door. She was sitting up in her bunk, wrapped tightly in a blanket, her face pale and her hair slightly damp from the humidity creeping in. "Sweetheart, can you check the window? The latch won't hold and the wind's blowing rain in." She wasn't wrong. The floor had pooled with water, and a few lightweight items had scattered across the room. The narrow window above her bunk was stuck slightly ajar, letting the storm push its way inside. Carefully avoiding her gaze, I stepped in and moved toward it. The window had been knocked off alignment just enough to jam it halfway open. I braced myself, applied slow, firm pressure, and finally managed to slide it back into place. It clicked shut. The latch caught. Only then did I let out a breath, still careful not to look directly at her, still holding on to the tension that had never quite left since that evening began. I said, "Got it." "Thank you, my love," she replied. I forced myself to turn and leave the stateroom. I had just reached the doorway when, barely audible beneath the roar of the storm, in the faintest whisper, Mom said, "Stay. Please." I wasn't certain I'd heard her correctly. I turned back, this time looking directly at her, and called her Mom for the second time that evening. "Yes, Mom." "I understand, Nathan," she said softly, her voice filled with a fragile mixture of fear and resolve. "It's okay. You don't need to be afraid." Her gaze held mine, serious, searching, yet undeniably anxious. This was a precipice. If I misinterpreted this moment, I risked irrevocably damaging the relationship with the person I loved most in the world. My own emotions surged, mirroring the tempest battering the cruiser, which was now rocking violently on the wind-whipped waves. I wanted to speak, to move, but I felt utterly paralyzed, swaying involuntarily with the motion of the vessel. I just stood there, mute and uncertain. Then I heard her speaking again, her voice incredibly soft and low. "Nathan, darling, I want you. I've tried. I've resisted this so hard, but I can't resist it anymore. Please, please, my love." All doubt, all hesitation evaporated in that instant. When it was over, much later, I eventually rose to leave. We went out onto the swim platform in the pre-dawn calm after the storm had passed and slipped into the cool, clean water together. I wasn't sure what the protocol was now. When we climbed back onto the cruiser, I started towards my own cabin. Mom simply said, "Won't you sleep with me tonight?" I didn't require a second invitation. I woke the next morning to find Bethany already up and moving about. Lying in her bunk, I could hear her humming softly in the kitchenette. Peeking out the cabin window, I saw that the storm had completely passed. Brilliant sunshine sparkled on the water. The lake's surface was like polished obsidian, broken only occasionally by the ripple of a fish snatching an insect from the surface. I got up and went to join her. After breakfast, I went out onto the foredeck. The entire world felt cleansed, reborn. I could smell the rich scent of damp earth and maple leaves, sharper now, as if experiencing for the first time since childhood. Birds sang riotously in the shoreline trees, their melodies mingling with a gentle lapping of water against the hull. I began the routine checks before getting underway. "How about," Bethany said, coming out to join me, "we don't travel far today. Just an hour or two. Find a nice spot and then just stop." I understood her meaning perfectly. We cast off and motored slowly along the shoreline. Soon, I was scanning for another secluded anchorage. I found a perfect spot on the western side of a point, shielded from the main channel, with a beautiful small rocky beach sloping gently into the water. We nosed the cruiser carefully into the shallows. It was already becoming a very warm day, so as soon as we were securely docked, we were ready for another swim. We went after the swim platform, and I lowered the ladder. This time, clothing seemed superfluous. We slipped directly into the water. It was only waist-deep near the stern, so we splashed and played like children before swimming out into the deeper, cooler water and back. After tidying up the cruiser a bit, I remembered noticing a slightly loose stanchion on the foredeck railing that needed tightening. There was a basic toolkit stowed below, so retrieving a screwdriver, I set about securing the hardware. It required a bit of force, and I was focused on the task when Mom came back aboard after exploring the small beach. Eventually, I finished tightening the stanchion. As it was already nearing midday, we sat down in the shaded cockpit for a simple lunch. Not much conversation passed between us during the meal. When we finished, Mom suggested softly, "Why don't you relax for a while?" It seemed like an excellent idea. I headed towards her stateroom. Later, we prepared dinner together, and when we were done, we returned to bed. We slept deeply. I woke sometime after noon the next day. Letting Bethany sleep, I went onto the deck and made myself a couple of turkey sandwiches. I ate them sitting on the foredeck, watching the gentle flow of the water. A family of mallard paddled in formation near a submerged log, diving periodically for food. A slight worry began to surface. We had effectively lost almost 2 days of travel time. We needed to reach the town further north for fresh supplies, a journey that usually took at least 6 days from our starting point, meaning about 4 more from our current location. When Mom woke up, I broached the subject with her, pointing out that we'd either have to significantly increase our daily travel time or turn back towards our home base to restock. She immediately dismissed the idea of returning early and proposed we make up the time by running the cruiser for longer hours each day. She suggested pushing even harder than I had proposed, aiming to reach the town in maybe 3 days, allowing for a more leisurely pace on the return leg. We finally agreed on this plan. Up until this point, it felt like Mom had taken most of the crucial steps. She had found the courage to articulate what we both desired. Now, I felt it was my turn to demonstrate commitment. We remained docked for the rest of that day. I considered returning to my own cabin that night, but when bedtime arrived, the thought of separating felt wrong, potentially hurtful to Bethany. I stayed. The following morning, we began our push northwards towards the town. The day after, we were delayed for several hours navigating a narrow, shallow channel that required careful piloting. Despite this, I calculated that we should still reach the town reasonably early the next day. On the third day, we approached the northern settlement. The town wasn't directly on the main lake channel we'd been following, but situated on a smaller tributary river that fed into the lake system. Therefore, just past the last designated wilderness marker, we took the narrower left fork and soon docked at the town's public marina. We spent the remainder of the day restocking our provisions at the local general store, and that evening treated ourselves to dinner at a surprisingly good rustic inn overlooking the water. The next morning, we began our journey back south. Now, time was ours again. We only needed to cover short distances each day. We cruised leisurely, hiked short trails, swam in secluded coves, and occasionally fished. But mostly, we simply existed in our newfound intimacy. The days flowed one into the next, drawing us closer as we drifted slowly back towards home. The question of this love, this profoundly altered relationship, loomed larger. What would happen once we returned to our normal lives? The conversation occurred not on the very last night, as I might have expected, but the evening before. Bethany spoke first, her voice quiet but firm in the soft lamplight of the cabin. I know that what we're doing crosses boundaries and societal norms. Many of our friends, our family, would condemn us if they knew what's happened between us. We would likely lose many of them. Despite that, I'm willing to risk all of it, and more, for the connection we found on this trip to continue. She paused, taking a steadying breath. Whatever existed before, the relationships we had with others, the way we related as mother and son, that's in the past, as far as I'm concerned. I think now is the time to decide if, and how, we are going to build a future together. She finished speaking and waited, her deep green eyes fixed on mine. Images swirled in my mind. The potential complications, family discord, the loss of friends, perhaps even legal challenges. A dull ache began behind my temples. I was lying on the bunk beside her. I turned my head to look at her properly. In that moment, I knew there were only two viable paths forward. I could leave home, creating distance, severing this new bond along with the old, or I could stay and commit to this uncharted territory. I struggled to find the right words. Bethany, Mom, could we agree to live together as partners for now? If it doesn't work, then I could leave. Even as I spoke, a wave of shame washed over me. My hesitant proposal felt cowardly compared to a bold declaration of love and commitment. Given everything we were risking, my uncertainty seemed weak. Yet Mom accepted my tentative terms with quiet grace. All right, Nathan, if that's what you need for now, she murmured, though I caught the faintest sigh in her voice. Then, with sudden firmness, she added, but during this, let's call it an exploration, there can be no other women in your life. Is that absolutely clear? I didn't need to say a word. My sharp nod was answer enough. At the time, I had no idea how drastically everything would change in the coming weeks. When we returned home, nothing appeared different on the surface. No one suspected the transformation in our relationship. The only noticeable shift was that, since I'd stopped dating, I spent far more time at home. Then, about a month later, the ground fell out from under us. Bethany approached me one evening, her expression tense with apprehension, and something else I couldn't quite place. Nathan, she said softly, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Darling, I think I might be pregnant. The word struck me like a punch to the chest. I stood frozen, my mind blank. What are we going to do? I finally managed, the full weight of her words crashing down on me. Her eyes welled with tears. Aren't you even happy? In that moment, I failed her. My own shock and fear blinded me to her vulnerability. Even in this modern age, when a woman faces such a life-altering revelation, some primal instinct demands reassurance, protection for herself and the child growing inside her. But I hesitated, and the instant I saw the hurt flash across her face, I hated myself for it. Guilt surged through me. I reached for her, stumbling over apologies. I'm so sorry. Bethany. Yes, of course I am. I wasn't expecting this. Sleep was impossible that night. My thoughts raced in frantic circles. But by morning, clarity cut through the chaos. I found Mom in the kitchen, pale and uneasy, preparing coffee. Without hesitation, I took her hands in mine. Bethany, I said firmly, if this is what you want, then I'm with you completely. No more trial runs. I'm staying. My voice didn't waver. I'll claim paternity openly, no matter where or when it's needed. If the law won't recognize me as your partner, then I'll stand beside you as your companion and the father of our child. Tears spilled down both our faces. Relief, fear, and a love deeper than anything I'd ever known. The first people we told were Uncle David and Aunt Melissa during one of their visits. Their reaction stunned me. Aunt Melissa, accepting the news without hesitation, beamed at us. Well, my dears, it's about time. David and I were just wondering when you two would finally make it official. They had sensed a connection between us long, before it had turned physical. In that moment, I silently thanked them for their unwavering love. For the first time, a fierce pride swelled in my chest. The fear of fatherhood faded, replaced by something new, hope. I won't recount every twist and turn of our lives from that point onward. But like Mom, I eventually pursued web design. Bethany built a thriving freelance business, and in time, I joined her as her partner. We work mostly from our home office, which gives us the freedom to